Invite also the newcomer. I will welcome you. But first, it's your turn now.
Okay, thanks very much. I'm Maureen Trott, and I'm from EMW in Hamburg. And I was hoping that Verena Guto would be here to give this presentation, but I'll do my best. With Dietrich help probably because he knows an awful lot about our work as well. And the EMW is not a church. Unlike the two previous speakers, it's an association of Protestant churches and missions in Germany, which was set up in 1975. And many people think that because we are German, we are Lutherans or Reformed, or the main churches in Germany, but we also have the Baptists and the Methodists, the Mennonites and the Moravians among our members, and several mission organizations as well. And the reason for establishing the EMW is to provide joint support for ecumenical ventures. As all the members wanted to work together to provide this joint support for ecumenical work in the field of mission in the widest sense of the word. And right from the beginning, there was a special emphasis on promoting ecumenical theological education. And this is done by our desk, the Theological Education Desk. And I could give you some of our priorities. The emphasis is on ecumenical theological education. So we don't normally support denominational theological education. There are always some exceptions to that rule, particularly in cases where the denominational institutions are very open ecumenically. And we support partners in Africa, Asia, Pacific, and Latin America, and the Caribbean, so it's all over the world. And we have special relationships with a lot of regional associations for theological education, which we talked about this morning. And the other main partners are colleges and seminaries, sometimes departments of universities for theology or religious studies, and also CE programs, distant education programs, lay training, and some associations of women theologians, because this is one of our priorities, is to support women's participation in theological education, not only as students but as teachers, and on the issues that are important for women, that they are included in theological education. Another emphasis is the contextual theology and the quality of theological education, which was also talked about this morning. We can support scholarship funds, but not individual scholarships. And that's always been one emphasis, that we leave the partners to decide themselves on who receives a scholarship. We don't dictate to them. Another important aspect is the viability of theological education, the self-sustainability, which is very difficult, of course, and we have many partners we supported for 20 or 30 years in some cases, for budget support, running costs, or particular needs that they have, and we always it's always based on an application that we receive, so we don't decide for them either what we support. The relationship with WCC is very important. It's a long-standing relationship, and the EMW is one of the major supporters of the ECE program, financially as well as close cooperation. And I would say we probably follow the lead of the WCC on the issues that are important in theological education. Had I forgotten? So, I guess buildings. I don't know if anyone else, that would be interesting to know if anyone else who is able to support buildings, hopefully education institutions, because we get a large number of applications, and I think we get the impression we're the only ones who are still able to give grants for construction, which is sometimes necessary, but it's increasingly difficult, I think, to find. I've forgotten anything. Ecumenical, yes, and ecumenical cooperation is something that we always want to encourage in theological education, and the aspect of the evangelical world was mentioned this morning too, and we find we have more and more contacts with evangelical colleges and seminaries who come to us for support, which seems to us to indicate their increasing openness, which is very positive from our point. So, can you add anything, or is that?
That's very fine with me. I don't dare to add too much, but just to refer once again that there is a very interesting case on the criteria and common standards for partnership with Indian theological education, where a kind of a common platform was developed in the major EMW consultation to have some common understanding on major priorities and criteria, and that document can be found also in the handbook on theological education, because from some of the organizations here like USPG, EMW, Association of Churches and Mission in Germany, and Overseas Council, there are some organizations which have their own articles in the handbook, which is here. So if you want to read more,
I've got a couple of copies of the India policy.
oh, that's
with the Senator Stone for it, and now we've got it.
okay.
Okay.
Thank you so much. I think we move to the next slot, which actually would be number 4, Church of Scotland, Anglican Communion, and number 7, Done Mission, because EMW is done. It's appearing twice in the list. So I'd like to ask you to come also in front and to use whatever is necessary in terms of technology. Do feel free to prepare also for later stages. Otherwise, you refer to papers, and that has been probably distributed. Huh? Okay, it's up to Ian now to make the lead.
I work with the World Mission Council, but we don't have any fancy presentations. This is Henry working on something else. The World Mission Council of the Church of Scotland is not to be confused with the Council for World Mission, which has lots of money. We, on the other hand, we're a council, a committee of the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland. From its very outset, the Church of Scotland said that it would not send out its mission work to a separate agency, and it kept its mission work as an integral part of the Church of Scotland. And in fact, in the what we call the Constitution, the Articles Declaratory of the Church of Scotland, which lays out what it is, the very first article declares that it is a church engaged in world mission. And so it's part of the central understanding of who we are as a church, that we do mission as a church and don't second it to a mission agency to do it on our behalf. And so that's been our history, and sadly that's why we're not a member of the Council for World Mission today, and would be able to do so much more if we were. I laid out a sheet just telling you about the particularity of the scholarship programme for the Church of Scotland. That highlights, I think, some of the key areas that we support in terms of funding scholarships, and you see in the second kind of section there the 27 different churches that over the last 6 years we've related to. Like USPG said earlier on, 5-6 years ago we went through a major contraction, and from having many partners from our own old colonial history, we concentrated on these 27 countries in which we engage with the churches and from which we can take the scholarships. Personally, I've been in this work for 4 months now as General Secretary, and I hope that we'll be able to open this up over the coming years again and to expand that list back to something like what we used to relate to in the good old days, as it were. But certainly the key is capacity building. It's working with the partner churches, listening to the partner churches, taking their lead in who they want to send for theological education. And in fact, it's not limited to theological education. We've sent people to agricultural college, to communication courses, to whatever capacity has been needed within the local church developed. The other part of that is, of course, that we send grants and we send mission partners, sometimes ourselves, sometimes in ecumenical arrangements, sometimes with the Methodists. In fact, we've worked and sent mission partners to work in the partner churches, sometimes teaching in theological institutions, so teaching Bible or theology in these institutions for the partners. And I think that's been one of the most enriching parts, is the ecumenical aspect that we've been able to engage with in the last number of years. Partly, of course, it started because of financial issues. None of us could afford to do it on our own, but there's also a richness that comes from that ecumenical partnership in sending mission partners to work. I have one little area. You can see what's on the sheet, and you can ask them questions, but there's one area I want to highlight. We have, rather controversially at times, the Church of Scotland had property in Israel, and we in the last few years have upgraded one of these properties, a hotel in Tiberias. We also have a guest house in Jerusalem, and as being new in this job, one of the things I want to see is how can we use these buildings, these institutions that we have, one in Jerusalem, one in Tiberias, for the wider church to make use of. Obviously, you can just go along and pay $500 a night to stay at our luxury hotel, but I want to see if there are ways that we can use them for the benefit of the churches there, for the local Palestinian community, and for the wider education, be it theological or broader education of the world church community. And one of the issues that I see is there's a good deal of Israeli public relations goes in to the African and the Asian context in terms of highlighting the Israeli narrative, but not helping to lift up and focus on the Palestinian Christian experience. And so how do we use these places to make sure, could there be theological engagement from some of the world church communities? Could we use them? Could some of us from the northern churches help to sponsor theological seminars and pilgrimages that would be not your traditional pilgrimage, but would engage with the local Palestinian community, would work and introduce Jewish and Muslim participants into the mix? That's an area that I would like, if anyone here is interested in looking to do something. We have these two centres, we have accommodation available, we can help with facilities and with the practicalities on the ground, because we have a minister in Tiberias and a minister in Jerusalem. How do we use them for the good of the church and for the engagement of the church in a theological, historical, educational process, but also to highlight the story of our Palestinian Christian brothers and sisters? So that's an area I would like to help from you to explore, whether today or in the months ahead. I wanted to highlight that, though, particularly in this session. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Just methodologically, one idea comes to my mind, because several people might have some of these very concrete matching and search indications. And if somebody like Joshua can use that paper there to put just a short phrase like Intercultural Theological Studies Center Jerusalem, ? Or however